What is one's legacy in life? This is not something I think the average person thinks about very much. I certainly don't. I just try to do a decent job, educate myself properly, help my fellow man, etc. But I think you can see, as you go along in life, the good that you've done and the bad things that have occurred as well. These are all a part of your legacy. So I think in a way, a little bit like karma, we should be conscious of what we are doing along the way of life, so to speak. Because later, when we leave here, why am I here? What's my mission? What happens when I leave here? Then my legacy will come forward, obviously. And people will speak of me in the past tense, in the way I was, the things I did, the kindness that I proffered, and perhaps the bad things I did as well. And you hope that the good will most assuredly outweigh the bad. And if you look throughout history, some of the more infamous people, they have a terrible legacy. So if you think of Adolf Hitler's name will extend forever as an evil man. Now, probably in his own mind, as Socrates tells us, in his own mind, he really believed that he was going to do good. But after Nazism was brought forward in the 1920s, it had its plan, and a couple of gentlemen were involved in the plan, and they were maybe more efficient than Adolf Hitler in implementing the plan, getting rid of inferior human beings, getting rid of inferior Christians and Jews and people that had mental illness, Russians that were not on the right side of Nazism, which would mean virtually all the Russians, communists, commissars. I mean, the legacy just goes on. These people took his words and did horrible things in Russia, things that defy imagination if you really study what went on in history. We can't possibly, in the modern era, really understand the kind of evil that was perpetuated there. Look it up. It'll shock you even more than me saying these words. But Hitler, of course, will be deemed as responsible, so his legacy will be forever tarnished. And you can go into history and look at Christ. Whatever you think about Jesus, the historical Jesus or the existential Jesus, either way, he comes across as a man of love. This is his legacy, for sure. So we think to ourselves, legacy, ultimately, what is it? Well, it is perhaps the enduring influence, maybe that would be a way to put it, of a person's life after they are no longer here. Now, why is it important, in a sense? Because I'm here and I won't know, will I, to be honest? Well, I think most importantly, it does give a meaning to people, right? Especially religious people, to do the right thing. And if you think to yourself, if you have a family, you want to have some legacy, some positive statement that people can refer to later. And I think Die Empty, Todd Henry, he always tells us this, doesn't he? That we most assuredly should get everything out that we possibly can, so then it can be evaluated, right? So other people in future generations are able to say if this were to be a good thing or not. And I think many times if you had a grandfather, perhaps who passed away, or a person, an important mentor that is deceased, you remember them. You remember the kind things that they did and the things that they shared with you in life. So legacy, most assuredly, is important. This is a poem from the lady who wrote Anne of Green Gables, of all things, Lucy Maud Montgomery. My legacy. My friend has gone away from me, from shadow into perfect light, but leaving a sweet legacy. My heart shall hold it long in fee, a grand ideal, common bright, a song of hope for ministry, a faith of unstained purity, a thought of beauty for delight. These did my friend bequeath to me, and more than ever these can be, the worthy pattern of a white, unmarred life lived most graciously. Dear comrade, loyal thanks to thee, who now hath fared beyond my sight. My friend has gone away from me, but leaving a sweet legacy. And this was written to Montgomery's friend who died in 1919 during the Spanish flu, the Spanish influenza. So obviously that friend made an impression on this lady. So you think in your own life, who is important to you that has passed away? And maybe you only have their diaries or their picture or something, but they made a statement to you, didn't they? And I would just like to leave you with a thought, some quotes on legacy. Socrates, of course, most famously said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." So he asks us to think about life and lay down a legacy that matters. From Aristotle, what is a friend? A single soul dwelling in two bodies. So he's discussing, of course, friendship and the legacy from that. From Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson, the great transcendentalist, the only gift is a portion of yourself, of course, after you've passed on. Marcus Aurelius, his famous book, The Meditations. Waste no more time arguing about what is a good man and what a good man should be. Be one. Interesting. Be a good man. Benjamin Franklin, well done is better than well said. Wow, so true. Winston Churchill, we make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give, what we give back. An act of kindness, which is something I try to do every day and I write in my notebook. Try it. What is my act of kindness today? It could be something very small. A smile. Open the door for someone, right? Jane Austen. There is no charm equal to tenderness of heart. And finally, from Steve Jobs, his most famous, the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. So you ask yourself, without vanity, which is the most important, right? With modesty, what will be my legacy? What will be what I leave for others after my life is transcended? What will be my legacy? Interesting question. And you know what they say? You know what they say. Critical thinking is everything, especially if you're going to lay down some form of legacy during your lifetime. And critical thinking is great. Truly great. You take care. God bless. Bye-bye. Hello, Leon here. Today is day 13. It has been another exciting day, real adventure. A little bit cool in the morning, around 18 or so, and it got up to 34 during the walk. But we were fortunate we had no rain. This evening, as we're recording this podcast, we're having rain. So we went from one small little city called San Juan de Ortega, tiny, maybe 50 people living there. Used to be a monastery at one point. And we went to the regional capital called Burgos, very large city. And we had to walk a very long way to find a place to sleep. But along the way, during the way today, we went to a museum in Burgos, and before this, when we went to the interpretive center of the Atapuerta archaeological site, it was here that they discovered remains that are 800,000 years old. This is the oldest human remains in Europe. So our ancestors, essentially, pieces of our ancestors basically are buried here. And so today we wanted to talk a little bit about history and what history means to me. Well, I think first and foremostly, if you ask people, do you like history? Most people will say, I hate history, or history repeats itself, or all sorts of things like this. But this is not why history is important. History is important because it gives me a place in the present, and I could look back and learn something. This is especially true of the history of my family, my grandfather and my great-grandfather, for instance, both of whom were, to me, extraordinary men who overcame diversity to raise a family. Both of them had large families, French-Canadian large families, and they educated them in the religion that they believed in, Roman Catholicism, and they tried to make them good people. But in their family, I always remember that my grandfather used to always dress formally for dinner. Dinner was a big deal, and everyone would sit down, and there was actually a ritual to dinner. And I know today we are so busy, and this includes me, of course, we are so busy that many times people forget that dinner is an important component. So something you might find interesting is slow food. It's an Italian movement that began some 20, 30 years ago. In Rome, they wanted to stop a McDonald's from actually developing. So the idea behind slow food is literally slow down. And our walk on the El Camino is forcing us to slow down and reflect on life and love and the history of our loved ones. The history of our loved ones. So think of this. History. Now over to Dave.
I'd like to talk about history as well, although I'd like to talk about it in a different aspect. So, as we went to that historical archaeological site, we had seen these remains of our ancient ancestors. And I realize that for many of us, 800,000 years old, it's hard for us to comprehend this. However, at some point in time, this is going to be us. And there are going to be other people looking back at us. And we will be history. Now, this is not a negative thing. It's just a natural part of the cycle of life. So, my question to you is, what do you want your legacy to be? For me, I'm not an old man yet, although I'm not a young man either. And I've already started to think about my legacy. What do I want to do here on Earth? What do I want to accomplish? For example, before I went and became an English teacher, one of my dreams was to make a difference in the lives of many people. And I think I've done that I've influenced a lot of people. Perhaps that's what they say anyway, some of my former students. And I think it's important just to think about these things. Why am I here? What's my mission? And then, of course, there's the other question, what happens when I die? But just to think about the first two as it relates to our legacy. How do we want to be remembered? I think it's a very important question to keep in mind.
So, once again, I know you don't like history, many of you, but if you could spend a little time and research the history of your own family and perhaps of your civilization, know the key points. This is something good because it'll frame the reality of today. If you know history, and many people say it repeats itself, but it actually doesn't. That's nonsense. But because it's impossible to repeat anything, really, because we were never there. How do we know what the truth? Say history is often the history that has been written is always written by the winners, the victors. So obviously, a lot of the history we read is embellished, perhaps not true at all. So, but regardless of that, think of history in the context that I'm going to learn something, and I'm going to learn about me, my family. And you please take care. God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.